Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever webinar series recording that we're going to be doing here at IESEG School of Management. And today, it's my honor to present to you my colleague and my friend, Professor Ashwin Baliga, who is here to talk about his recent research on mental health among B2B salespeople, a morphological analysis. Thank you, Professor Baliga, for being here as well.
So thank you, Professor Deva, and it's a pleasure to be on this first podcast, and I'm very excited to discuss about this research paper with you.
Absolutely. Right. So now the title of your paper talks about, this idea about mental health among B2B salespeople as well, right? Tell us a little bit more about what is your research about.
Okay, so this is just to understand the stress that the salespeople face at work. What kind of stress they are subjected to, and the impact this stress would have not only on them but also on the organization as well as their customers.
Ah,
And
yeah.
what is that individuals can do when they are subjected to stress. So we discuss about the different mitigation strategies, that is when as an individual, when a salesperson is subjected to stress, what is that they can do to bring it down, because the consequences are very negative in nature. And at the same time, what support the organizations and the supervisors can provide to bring this under control. So this is not just an individual's responsibility, but organizations and managers also have a bigger role to play. So in this research, I kind of provide an episodic overview discussing the various causal factors that cause stress, the manifestation of these, the negative consequences that are associated with this, and the mitigation strategies, and finally, in academic terms, the different theoretical frameworks that has been all these years used to study this topic.
Sure. So one of the things that triggered me was that, remember I am a lot older than you are, and I remember one of the first papers that I had seen before on meta-analysis of what makes
Hmm.
salespeople perform well, and it goes back to the 70s, and they talk about stress there, right? And fast forward almost 50 years,
Hmm.
and here you are and your co-author team also talking about stress. So what inspired you? Because at the end of the day, is that you're talking about stress and it's been studied a lot. So
Yeah.
you talked about it, but what inspired you to take it up now, given a vast body of knowledge that
Hmm.
already exists about stress and how it affects the performance of salespeople and other outcomes as well?
Okay. So I think there were two reasons as to why I was interested in this particular topic. The first thing was that I would speak to a lot of my friends who are in this profession of sales, and I also interacted with a lot of practitioners. And the most common thing that they told me when I discussed that, what is new in your field? Can you tell me something which is happening? And the most common, thing that all the time came out was that we have a lot of stress in our job. And when you ask them why is this the case, they say that this is a B2B space. You have less number of customers and less suppliers too, and by hook or crook we need to get these orders, and it's not easy to get them because everybody is kind of trying their ways out to kind of woo the customers. So this was one thing. And the second thing was that, as faculties, we are also expected to kind of get this research work which is kind of published. And when we have these rejections, we tend to feel very low. At that point of time, I came across this special issue, which was there was a call for a special issue on industrial marketing management, which was by Professors Bruno Lucier and team. And at that point of time, we were also working on this tech in sales paper, and that is where the idea began. And I saw that this problem was kind of clearly defined, exactly what I had discussed with my friends, with those practitioners. The same thing was kind of mentioned here. And when I was going through the literature, the one thing that I saw was that this was discussed a lot, as you rightly pointed out, for the last 50 years, but all of them were in kind of fragments. And what I wanted to do later was that, try to bring in this body of knowledge together and kind of prepare one piece which kind of provides an holistic overview of this particular concept. So that is where the idea was all about. I mean, that is how it all began.
But it's very interesting you talk about this, and I think one of the things that, as a person who's also done some work in the domain of stress, not
Hmm.
necessarily what you have
Hmm.
done with your co-authors in this as well,
Hmm.
and I think the key aspect, I think that my takeaway from reading your paper was that in different points in time, while the way stress has been studied is the same, but the causality of stress could have been different
Hmm.
and different points in time. So essentially, while we have just looked at stress, but at different points in time, certain things take on more of a significance than the others. And one thing that struck me from your paper was the practical relevance of it, right? Because I think, can you shed some light on why should firms be interested? So it's one thing to say Professor Baliga and his co-authors
Yeah.
thought it was
Yeah.
interesting, but
Hmm.
why would a practitioner be interested in this?
Okay. So whenever you speak to a practitioner and you ask them that how important is this topic, the answer that you get from them is that this is very important. The next thing that you ask them is, what do you do when somebody kind of comes to you with this? They say that we kind of provide them support. And when you further kind of question them and ask what happens when this feedback is passed to you, they do not have an answer. And this is done. This is across every level, whether it is at the executive level, at the managerial level, or even at the top level. It's not that every time when a person is subjected to stress, you need to do something very extraordinary. So what we kind of suggest in our research paper, based on the synthesis of the various studies conducted in the past, that sometimes just a little intervention from the organization or the supervisor can also kind of bring these stresses down. You just don't, a simple pat on the back, telling the employee that, trying to be being in their situation, being very empathetic towards them, trying to define the role very clearly, because this could, what we call as, to a large extent, reduce what we call as role stress. Because most of the times the confusion or this chaotic environment which is there could be because the roles are not clearly defined, or the salesperson is not empowered in per se, or the organization doesn't have a formal policy in place, or they do not give them proper resources but expect them to do a lot of things, or may bring in what we call as competition inducing leadership, where they just want to bring out the best in you, but it is actually doing the other way around, right? So what we say is that we kind of tell them that what is that the organizations can do. We kind of provide a repertoire of the various mitigation mechanisms, especially what the organizations can do by means of proper career planning, kind of ensuring that when they do a recruitment, hire somebody who has a higher technology self efficacy, that who has better self capabilities, kind of provide them training in the areas where they believe that, okay, this employee can be trained in this particular area, so that their self efficacy or self capabilities improve. And supervisors can also be nice to them, right? Trying to be in their situation, trying to help them out. So what we try to make them view the problem as an opportunity, rather than putting them in that stressful situation. So this is something that managers can use, because of which I think this can be
Great.
slightly brought down, the negative
Uh,
effects can be brought down.
it's wonderful because you answered a question that I have for later on, but I was
Yeah.
more interested more in terms of why is this important to managers? Because in your
Yeah.
paper, you also talk about the amount of dollars that could be
Yeah.
potentially lost if a
Yeah.
salesperson is
Hmm.
either not performing well, or I think you do talk about in your paper about the fact that some of them could leave the organization, could
Yes.
they could be turnover intentions, and that
Hmm.
also has repercussions in terms of how you can take care of your customers, how you
Hmm.
cannot kind of encumber your salespeople who are left behind to take on the
Hmm.
additional workload of the salesperson who's burnt out, right? So,
Hmm.
from that viewpoint, is that also something that triggered you? Because it's one of those things where sometimes the tendency for us in academics is to be so focused on what we do that we forget that this also has huge implications for managers, that we have to understand that, like a dollar or a euro value towards what happens if this is not covered. So is it something that you also kind of touch upon as well?
Yes, yes, we do touch upon this, and this is a very important question as well. So, just taking you to the start point where we were discussing about the causal factors. So, if you look at
Yeah.
the research papers, what they do is that typically they try to study one of the causal factor and show its impact on stress. But if you look at how we have kind of developed this, we say that the causal factors could be because of personal issues. A salesperson could be having, they may have personal issues, which could be because of health related issues. Somebody in their family is not keeping well, relationship related issues, which is something which is very common these days, and also financial stress, which means that, they are overspending a lot in. Now this is what comes at the personal level. Then we do have at the job level, where, which we all know, that at job they do face a lot of issues at work, which could be because of leadership, it could be because of the customers, because of the role. But if you actually see, the stress that a salesperson undergoes might be because of integration of all these factors, which means a salesperson may have some issues at home. There could be personal issues. This could combine with job issues, which what we mean to say is that there could be a combination of these reasons which might actually cause them stress. Now, the impact of this, as you rightly pointed out, is not just for the salesperson. It is the organization that pays as well as the customers that pay. So if you look at the kind of dependent variable, we discuss about something called as ethical behavior and deviance, where we say that the ethical behavior of the salesperson goes down. You no longer trust the salesperson. You clearly see that this change which is kind of visible. We also discussed two things which is called as latent and visible manifestations, where when a salesperson is subjected to stress, some of them may not even want to speak about it and might just keep it within them, versus in some cases it might be completely visible to you, where you could see that there is a complete change where they become lone wolves. They don't want to kind of interact with anybody, which one might argue is also good and bad as long as there is no damage done. But deviant behaviors are more dangerous because it really costs the organizations. So by when we say deviance, there are three forms of deviance which we kind of mention in the paper as well. It could be organization deviance, where I speak bad about my own organization. It could be interpersonal deviance, where I speak bad about my co-workers. And there could be customer deviance as well, which is even more dangerous, where you speak bad about your customers to others. And this ultimately has a consequence on what comes in, and the organization pays at the end.
Indeed.
Uh,
No, absolutely. But Ashwin, so now you talk a little bit, you've definitely talked about the fact that from a theoretical perspective
mhm,
or from a contribution to academics, you're talking about bringing in a holistic view. You talked
uh,
also about the episodic idea over the years, how things have changed,
mhm,
which I think is very, very interesting. You
mhm.
made a case for also managers and what they should be aware of. Now, if I were to ask you a question, which is pretty much very important thing, is it always bad? Because I know that there is a lot of literature that says that in some instances, there's positive stress, there's eustress, right? That is the idea is that sometimes
Yes.
a
Mhm.
situation that creates stress might
Yeah.
actually be seen in a positive way because it might trigger certain people. So
Correct.
essentially, how do you account for that in your research?
Yeah. So stress, most of the times, what we think is it is negative, as you rightly pointed out, which is distress or what we call as negative stress. But also there is a positive side of stress, which is called as eustress. And in some cases, this depends upon the individual capabilities. For example, let's say that when the same stimulus is given to salespeople, a task is given. Stimulus, let's say a task is given to salespeople. It depends on the person's individual capabilities as well. One might think that no, this is not at all possible and might give up at the very first instance. But there could be one more salesperson who might view this challenge as an opportunity to do better.
Mm.
Now, if you have somebody who views this as a challenge to do better, they are likely to experience less stress versus a person who has already kind of given up.
Indeed. I think to me, that's one of the things which I think is also very interesting, right? Because stress
Yeah,
is always seen as negative, but in some instances,
negative.
it can be a
Yeah, the
positive as well,
positive
right?
sides.
Yeah. Absolutely, right? So, Ashwin, as we come to the end of what we're discussing here, what would be some of the key takeaways that you would suggest for managers and leaders who are possibly going to listen to this particular interview of yours?
Well, as I was indicating in our earlier conversation, which was a bit brief, organizations and managers, supervisors have a very big role to play. Now, most importantly, it is to see that when you provide a channel for the customers, for your salespeople to kind of complain, it is important for them just not to take these complaints, but to work on it. Because at the end of the day, if you do these counseling, if you collect all this information and do nothing about it, then absolutely, this exercise will end up being in no use. But at the same point of time, it is also important for managers to kind of define roles of the salespeople very clearly, kind of set up the expectations very, very clearly as to what is expected out of them. Do what we call as this, empower them with various resources and tools, because this is what is very important.
Hmm.
The sales is getting complex, and with various technological tools like immersive tools that are being coming in, your competitors might be using it, and this also might create what we call as stress, which we call as techno stress, where technology itself may induce stress.
Yeah.
Now what managers can do is that they can provide you these resources in a effective manner, so that a sales employee no longer views this profession of selling as something which is stress, but actually enjoys it, and that is when the stress levels can actually kind of come down.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your insights, and I'm sure that on behalf of your co-authors as well, that we would like to thank you
Mhm.
for taking the time to actually also talk to us about this. Thank you.
Thank you.